Another drone strike deep inside Ukrainian territory. Russia attacked Ukrainian ports near Romania on Wednesday night. However, this time, Moscow targeted key facilities vital for shipping grain from Ukraine. This comes after the collapse of the Black Sea grain deal. Since pulling out of the grain deal in July, Russia has intensified attacks on facilities vital for Ukrainian grain shipments. To put this into perspective, Russia struck grain elevators and warehouses in the port of Izmail. It is important to note that this port sits just across the Danube River from Romania. Officials in Kyiv say 40,000 tons of grain were destroyed. Kyiv says the attack resulted in damage to silos, warehouses and administrative buildings. Grain shipments from this particular port move across the Black Sea. The shipments were headed to African nations Israel and China. Kyiv has accused Russia of using Iranian drones to carry out the attack. France has reacted to the strike and accused Russia of deliberately putting global food security at risk. Paris accused Moscow of only pursuing its own interests, even at the expense of the most vulnerable populations. Meanwhile, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan spoke to Putin over the phone and emphasized that no steps should be taken to escalate tensions in the Ukraine-Russia war. Meanwhile, Putin asked Erdogan to aid Russia export its grain to African countries vulnerable to food shortages. This devastating attack comes merely days ahead of a peace summit in Saudi Arabia. The summit is organized by Ukraine and will be hosted in the city of Jeddah on the 5th and 6th of August. As per reports, senior officials from 30 nations are expected to attend. William Harrison Courtney is a senior fellow at RAND. He is joining us from Washington, D.C. William, welcome to WION The World is One. Since Russia pulled out of the grain export deal in July, the country has intensified attacks on facilities vital for Ukrainian grain shipments. What's the message, really, that President Putin is trying to put across with this?
President Putin probably has several motives. One is to discourage Ukraine from continuing to pursue its counteroffensive, which has some positive prospects, even though it's gone slower than expected. Second, Putin probably thought that the West would put pressure on Ukraine to ease up on Russia in order to allow more of the grain to be exported. The West has an interest in a number of countries, poorer countries in the world, having access to grain. Putin saw with his own eyes, though, disappointment among African countries. He convened 20 plus African leaders in St. Petersburg a few days ago.
Right.
And the African leaders told him they didn't want free grain from Russia, which Putin offered. They wanted the grain deal to be resumed because that offers far greater amounts of grain. The presidents of Egypt and South Africa were particularly strong in voicing their concerns. So I think Putin has underestimated the amount of international concern caused by his ending the grain export arrangement.
William, in your own view, does Ukraine have an alternative or options apart from the counteroffensive? And if they do, what is it? How will it change the course of the war?
The counteroffensive that Ukraine has been preparing for some time and is underway, although not all of the main forces of Ukraine have yet been engaged, is vital for Ukraine to be able to seize some of the territory of eastern Ukraine and hopefully close off the land route between Donbass and Crimea, which would be important for isolating Crimea to a greater extent and making more vulnerable to pressure from Ukraine. So Ukraine is pretty strongly motivated to do that. It has a lot of Western equipment. Western-trained Ukrainian soldiers now are engaged. And for Russia, if it loses in this area, the Kremlin could come under greater internal pressure.
William, finally, how vulnerable are the Baltic states following this counteroffensive? and in light of Russian strikes, especially in countries like Romania and Latvia and even Poland?
Well, those countries, the Baltics, Romania, Poland, are all members of NATO. Thus far, Russia seems careful not to attack a NATO member because NATO's strength has been reinforced since the full-scale war that Russia has launched. And there's no question that NATO will respond to any attack on NATO territory by Russia. So Russia is concerned about that. The Baltics are worried, but NATO's providing more troops for rotational deployments through the Baltics. So I think those countries are in safer condition than Ukraine.
To William Harrison Courtney, he is a senior fellow at RAND, and he has been talking to us live from Washington, D.C. William, thank you very much for all your inputs and for talking to WION World is One.
You're quite welcome.